This interview is being conducted by Sandra Thurlow at South Fork High School on January 29th, 2003.
Good girl.
And I'm interviewing Dr. Dale Hipson. Will you start by spelling your name?
Okay. My name is Harry Haysdale Hipson II. Nickname. Harry, and Haysdale, Hazeedale, and then Hipson, Hipson. And I've got the Dale part of Haysdale, and my son got the Hayes part, and my dad had the Harry part. So that's actually Hayes is number 3, but we won't go into that. When he was in school the first year, the teacher called up Mom, his mother, Sue, and said, "I think your son is hard of hearing." And she said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I keep calling his name Harry, and he doesn't answer." And he went by Hayes, of course. So he wasn't hard of hearing.
Well, we're on names, and then we'll come back to where you're born and everything. You have a funny story about what you were called as a youngster. Will you tell us that?
Yeah, sure will. Back, everybody used to go to the Stewart Drug and sit and have their coffee breaks and everything. And Dr. Parker was there. Red Williams, he was the pharmacist. Mike Littman, who later became a lawyer, he was there. And Mom came there one day and said, I'm bilious. What do you have for bilious? As that was their term for an upset stomach back then, bilious. And so they gave her some over-the-counter medication, and the next week she said, I'm still bilious. And the third week said, I'm really bilious. And she was pregnant with me. So the medicine didn't help worth a darn. So Red Williams, when I came along, he called me bilious. And the folks said, that's not a good name, we'll call you Billy. So they called me Billy. And then that got shortened down to Bill. They called me Bill. And when I went in the first grade, they sat me down in the bedroom. That's where we had all our serious conferences, in the bedroom. And I said, Bill, we got something to tell you. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm adopted. And they said, how did they put it? They said, oh, your name is not really Bill, it's Dale. And so that was a traumatic experience back then for a little fella going into the first grade. First grade was bad enough, but it went from there.
So that's quite a name story. Will you tell me where you were born and when?
Okay, I was born right here in Stewart. It was Palm Beach County then, in May 16th, 1925. And it became Martin County, I believe, in June of that same year. So I was born in. No one has lived in Martin County longer than I have, and that's the truth.
So you were here from the beginning.
From the beginning, right.
How did your family happen to come here?
Okay, my granddad, who was an engineer, mechanical engineer and inventor, he invented some air conditioning things. In fact, he had some in the White House way back when. And he retired and looked all over Florida for a place to retire. He grew up in Lakeland, in Florida. In fact, they came down by ox cart, his parents from Georgia and Alabama. And on the way down, they were attacked by the Indians and all that. So he goes way back to Lakeland. And he swears up and down that they named Lakeland Lakeland. Of course, other families claim the same thing. But he looked all over Florida for a place to retire. And he liked the Stewart area because of all the waterways, the St. Lucie River. And so that's why he came down. And of course, Dad came down with that in mind. Go ahead.
Let's get the names of your grandfather.
I'm sorry, right, yeah, McCrary, P.R. McCrary, Pierce they call him. And he and his wife, holy cats, I can't remember her name. It was Grandma. I'm sure she had a name.
Well, we can find that.
We'll find that out.
And tell me about how your father got down.
Okay, when then Dad came down, he wanted to come down, but Stewart only had electricity in town in the afternoons. They had a small generator, and one section of town would have it on Tuesday and then Wednesday and Thursday downtown. And then when they got a bigger generator, then he came down. And John Taylor and Ashley, sent him a telegram. Dad was practicing in Jacksonville, waiting on the bigger generator. And when it came, John sent a telegram saying we have electricity all day, every day, come on down. So we did, and this was in 1925. And So that's when we came to Stewart.
So someone was just asking me when we got electricity in Stewart. So
that would be in 1925 in that area.
For full-time electricity.
For full-time, right, for the real thing. So that would come pretty close.
Okay, so can you tell me about them coming? I know you've heard the stories.
Oh, well, they came, you mean from Jacksonville? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got on the train, and it took 8 hours to come from Jacksonville. It was a slow train. It must have been the local. But they got off at Stewart. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was nobody there, of course. I mean, it's just dead, period. And Mom heard Dad mutter under his breath and said, "My God, what have I done?" He thought he really screwed up big time.
You think it took him a while to adjust?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it did, because Dad was from Norwalk, Connecticut, and Mom was from the Atlanta area in Georgia. And I'm sure it took a while to get used to not many people, and transportation was kind of on your own. You either walked or drove a car, and that was it. So, but they managed, but it was a quiet, sleepy little town back then.
Where did you first live, or they lived before you came?
Okay, they had a little house on 4th Street, which is now Ocean Boulevard. And there were 4 little houses, and we were in the middle one. That can't be. We were in number 2.
Uh-huh.
And those little houses, there's 2 of them left. It's right near where Chasen's garage was, and I think it's the Sun Tint studio now, where they tint the car windows on that area. And I was born in the house.
But close to today's Baptist Church?
Yeah,
on the West
right,
Ocean?
On West Ocean. No, it's on East Ocean. Baptist Church is on East Ocean, isn't it? I hope it is.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I see what you mean. I see.
Right.
US 1 is the divider, you say, instead of Colorado.
But we were on the south side of that 4th Street, East Ocean Boulevard.
So your parents, where did your father practice dentistry at first?
In Jacksonville.
No, I mean when he got to Stewart.
Oh, when he got here. Okay.
Where was the office?
It was above Long Bottom's barber shop. It was a 2-story building, and you had to walk stairs to go up there. OSHA would just have a fit right now, because there was no preferred parking or anything. You had to walk up the stairs, and he was it. He answered the telephone. He did his own secretary work. Mom would help him some with the things, but that was it, and he was up there. And then later in 1942, he built the first professional building in Stewart, where it is now on 33 East Osceola, and it's still there.
Why was it so bothered? Describe the new office.
Oh, it was they call it Art Deco, because they were doing all that down in Miami and Lauderdale. Had that. It was shaped like a ship. It had the two rounded areas, and the 2 rounded windows were like portholes, and then it had the railing, like the railing on a ship. Dad liked boats. He liked sailboats. And he and the architect got together and dreamed that up, and it's still a nice looking building.
And probably the only example of that type of architecture we have in our little town.
I'm not sure, but a lot of people come by and take pictures of it, look at it, and quite take it. And it's a good, solid building. Boy, it is solid. If there was a whiz-bang hurricane, that would be the place to go.
Shall we go back to your grandfather, because he came here first, and say where he first lived in this area?
Here, okay. He lived in Bessie Addition. The house is still there. When he came, the boom had bust. He was in real estate, had the Rainbow Realty, and where the old Otterson building is in that area. And they had a 2-story house in Bessie Addition. And they lived on the top story. The bottom part they didn't finish because they ran out of money, because it was the Depression. And he was up top there. And then he had a little farm out on Bessie Creek. Had a small 2-story house out there. Had the 2 stories so he could get air and get away from the bugs and get some ventilation. And he liked that. And
does that house still stand?
No, the house in Bessie Addition, yes.
It does?
Yeah. Cromer used to live there. And there's a gal that works with the county, lives there now. And I don't know her last name, but it's still there, and it's in good shape.
It's good.
And all that time. But the farm out in Bessie Creek, he would raise potatoes just for the fun of it, potatoes and cabbage and lettuce. And the cabbage and lettuce he'd feed to the sea cows. He had a little dock out there, and he had a ship bell that he put on the water, and he'd raise it up and down, and it would clank, and the sea cows could hear that. That was their signal, and he'd come up, and they would come up, and he'd feed them the cabbage and lettuce leaves.
So he was an early nature lover.
Right. Yes, he was. He loved nature.
You had another story about him feeding birds.
Oh, okay. This was in their house in Bessie Edition during the Depression. And he was always over the carport there. There was a roof. Could I have a drink of water?
You had another story about feeding animals.
Oh, okay. That was the house that was in Bessie Edition. And like I say, they lived on the top floor. And over the carport, there was a tarred-in area where the birds would come, and Granddad would feed them. And he was always feeding, we call them redbirds then, and bluebirds. We weren't very up on it. And he was always feeding them bread, fresh bread, and his wife would say, Pierce, stop feeding those birds. That's our lunch out there. I was going to make a sandwich out of that. And he was always pinching this food and feeding it to the birds. He was a nature lover. He and I camped up when the farm burned up Bessie Creek, with the forest fire they burned, and people stole things. They even dug up the trees that were there, the fancy palm trees. They dug those up. But anyway, we went camping in my little pup tent, and he showed me the trick of hollowing out a little spot in the sand under the tent for your hip. So when you laid down on it, there was a little depression for your hip to go in. I thought that was pretty tricky. And we were sleeping there, and there's so many mullet and snook hitting them in front of his place that we couldn't sleep. It was just solid, just bang, bang, like you dropped a big tub in the water all night long. Just hundreds of snook tearing up in there. That was quite an experience.
Tell me about your pronunciation of that fish, because I've noticed that the old timers say it that way.
What, snook?
Uh-huh.
Isn't it snook? I thought it was.
Always has been
Always
to you.
has been, right.
Uh-huh. I understand they weren't so popular early.
No, golly, they were a trash fish. They call them soap fish even because they tasted like soap. And then someone got the bright idea of skinning them, filleting them and skinning them. And that did away with the bad taste, and now they're a food fish.
A prize
food fish. Right, those rascals are hard to catch, I'll tell you. Oh.
Okay. Just say your grandfather's name again.
Oh, Pierce.
Pierce McCrary.
McCrary, right.
Now, he had relatives that came too?
Yeah, he had a son, let's see, gosh, he was a constable. And that was Mom's brother. Shoot. Anyway, we'll come back to that. But they lived in there, Callie, McCrary, and Hugh. Hugh was his name, Hugh. And he lived in that little lot right across from the Culture Center, where the old courthouse was.
Oh.
There was a little house right there that's now gone. And Callie was, I think she was a bookkeeper for the city hall for years,
yes.
20, 30 years, something like that. Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
Okay. So now we're going to go back to your father, the dentist, and your mother. How did they get involved in the community? What were some of the things they did?
Oh, okay. Mom she worked with the garden club. She was president of the garden club and worked with Ed Menaker on that. They, planted the trees, and she was with the UDC, is that, United Daughters of the Confederacy, is that one? Mm-hmm. And the DAR, Daughters of the other thing. Mm-hmm. We're on both sides, apparently.
Oh.
And she worked with them and the library. She was president of the Library Association. And Dad was president of the Rotary Club, and he was the city commissioner for 12 years in the 30s and during the war. He was mayor during the war years. I remember he had the proclamation for the blackout, the newspaper and what to do and what not to do on the blackout. It was a flyer printed in the newspaper and then flyers too. And for air raids, the blackout for the air raids strictly. And this was in February of '42, and it seemed so odd that they were preparing for air problems, but it came from beneath, came from the sea, came from the submarines. So we were all cocked and primed for protection from the air, but it came from beneath.
And even you as a child helped, I understand?
Yeah. I was air raid warden. I'd get on my bicycle and go around when they had the blackout, the practice blackouts. I'd go around, pedal around the neighborhood without a light, which was tricky, and check on the people and make sure they had their shades drawn and no light was present, because they finally figured out that the submarines were using the glow from the shoreline to silhouette the ships as they were passing at night, because everything was real bright, and they would be offshore, and when the ship would get between them and all the lights on shore, then they could see them and track them, because apparently they didn't have radar.
Do you remember those explosions out at sea?
Right, yeah. I was going to tell you, the first one that sunk was the Republic. That was down off of Jupiter, and it was at night. And I was in my sister's, but she was off at school. I was in my sister's bedroom. I lived on the back porch. And the explosion rocked me almost out of bed. I just about fell out of bed. It was that severe. And Dad, we all got up. It was about 11 o'clock at night, I guess. And we got up, and just then an airplane came over, and Dad said, "My God, we're having an air raid, you know." And I said, "No, Dad, that's the Eastern airliner," and it made the same pass every time, and I could recognize the sound of the motors. But that was the first torpedo missed the ship, then hit the reef that all of this area is built up on, and it vibrated and really shook things. They felt it as far as Vero, I believe, and down to Palm Beach. They felt the jolt from this explosion.
Amazing.
So it was amazing. And,
as an adult, have you seen any signs of those submarine wrecks or the freighters?
Right. Yeah, we've actually dived on two of them, the Halsey and the Amazon, which are off Jensen Beach, off 12A, up there, Market 12. I guess they moved 12. And I went in there with a couple of times, and you could see the ship, one of them that had torn apart and was upside down, and the other one was just there. The Amazon was the smaller one. It was a freighter. It was a smaller ship, and you could still see the propeller and the rudder. And on the Halsey, which was a tanker, had 80,000 gallons of naphtha and gasoline on it. And we got some portholes. In fact, I had a porthole with a picture of a fish that I took on the same wreck in the office there. We brought that up, Craig Swavely and I, and his sons. The sand, you know how the sand will do, it uncovered some of the wreck, and the portholes were there, so we went down and relieved the pins that held the porthole. It took all my air. It was about 80 feet of water. And we had to work at getting a couple of pins out of the attachment there, and then came on up and cleaned it up and made a nice picture frame.
How interesting. You have that documented.
Right. Of course, you're not supposed to do that, I guess. I don't. Scratch that part, okay?
Okay, your father was mayor.
Right.
And how did it feel to be the mayor's son?
Nothing special. Oh, it was a big deal because we got our garbage collected for free. That was the pay. The garbage collection was for free, and that was it. Also, he did finagle and got a little ramp built out in the river on our street so that the pumper fire truck could go down there and refill his tank in case there was a fire in the neighborhood. He did get that done. So it was a little jetty-like thing, and had rock on it so the truck could back up, get into the deep water, siphon out the water for his tank, and then go around the neighborhood and pump. So that was...
Does that ramp still exist?
Parts of it. I was looking at it the other day. There's a little bit there. There's a little right-of-way down there, and someone said they might build one of those little mini parks down there, which would be kind of nice.
So it's one of those little city-owned areas at the end of a road.
Still there. Right.
Okay, how interesting.
Yeah. That was the extent of my...
Now, after the war, there was a connection between Camp Murphy and your parents, it seems, establishing the park.
Oh, yeah. Mom and Ed Miniger worked on that quite a bit, getting the park going. And
Were you aware of that, or were you away?
Vaguely. I was away. I was probably gone off to dental school. I went to school forever after I went for 9 years, because after the war, everybody was on the GI Bill, and I kept going, and they said, just keep going, just keep going. So I got my degree, and then I had another summer, and just kept on going until finally they gave up, and I went into dental school.
Okay, will you tell me about growing up here and your friends?
Oh, okay. It was a small town, and everybody knew everybody. When you passed the car out of town and it had a 42 license tag on it, you always looked, and usually you recognized who was in the car, and you'd wave to them or yell at them when you went by. But it was a small area, and mainly I ran around with Earl Rico and Chi-Chi, his sister, and Henry Beckman, and Steve Roos, who lives up in Georgia now, and Evans Prairie and Corky. And there was just a bunch of us that palled around together. We'd fish together and we'd hunt together. And it was a nice area to grow up in. And it was sort of wide open. People didn't really get upset about noises and things. On my 10th birthday, I got a .22 rifle. And at my house, where it is now, right next to Harry Dyer's house. And I got 500 bullets, and I shot them all up the first day in a sand pit. And he didn't complain, Now, he did complain one time. We went duck hunting, Earl Dyer and Henry and I. And when we came back to the house, where it's right there, right near Poppleton Creek, and we had some shells left over, and some crows came flying by. So we were shooting the crows, and it was a Sunday, about 11 o'clock. And Harry Dyer wandered over and said, "You boys do know this is in the city limits, don't you?" That's all he said. So but we were banging around with 12-gauge shotguns on Sunday morning. Now, that's not too swift. That wouldn't go over too good now.
No.
Not at all.
It wouldn't.
No.
So do you think all the guys became so attached to nature, or just?
Gosh, they seemed to, because that was the thing we did. We would either fish or hunt or just go around in the river or go to the beach. We did surfing. Our surfboards we'd made some in manual training, these great big jobs, the hollow with the wood, and God, they were heavy. But the other thing we did was get like a unbleached mattress cover, wet it, and you get the thing wet, you run down the beach, fill it up with air, and then hold one in tight, and that would make like a surfboard. And you get out there, and it really worked. In fact, you would beat the wave to the beach, which was not too good because it hit solid ground. But that's one of the things we did, and we did a lot of boating and hiking around.
You had a board as well as a sail thing, didn't you? Or, will you explain that again?
Oh, okay. It was just like a big bag. It was from a mattress cover. And you would get it wet, so it would be waterproof, and you'd hold it open like this. You'd run down the beach, get it full of air, then you'd close the end, and it was like a great big pillow. And you'd swim out, you'd hang on to that one side, where it was open. They'd close it. You'd paddle out, and then you'd catch a wave. And it was just like a big buoyant balloon. And it really worked. I've never seen anyone do it. Have you?
No.